I never imagined that surrendering would lead me to a place so strange, so unlike the hell I'd been warned about back in England. My name's James Thornton, and I was one of the British soldiers captured during the North African campaign. We had been told countless times that if we ever fell into enemy hands, the fate awaiting us would be merciless. Forced labor, starvation, beatings, and endless humiliation. The propaganda drilled into us was as relentless as the desert sun. But what I found after being taken prisoner was something entirely different, something I still struggle to understand. When we were rounded up and disarmed by the American forces, I braced myself for the worst. I expected snarling guards, rough treatment, and grim conditions. Instead, I was met with a surprising calmness, the soldiers handing out cigarettes with a grin, offering water in the blistering heat, and even cracking a joke or two in perfect English. I remember thinking, is this some elaborate trick? Like a Monty Python sketch gone wrong? But no, it was real. We were loaded onto trucks, not crammed like cattle but seated properly, and transported to the port where we boarded a ship bound for America. The journey across the Atlantic was surreal. The ship was clean, the air fresh, and the food, well, I'd never expected to see white bread and proper meat again. I remember whispering to my mate, "Are they trying to fatten us up for a fancy dinner party? Or what?" The horror stories we'd grown up with couldn't have been further from this reality. As we approached the American coast, the sight was overwhelming. The skyline of New York City, with its towering skyscrapers and endless docks bustling with activity, was like a scene from a dream or a nightmare, depending on how you looked at it. The vastness of this country was something we had only heard about in stories, and now it was right in front of us. From there, we were taken by bus to the camp in a small town called Millfield, Ohio. The landscape was entirely foreign to me. Sprawling fields, neat farms, and quiet streets where children waved as our convoy passed. The locals seemed indifferent, barely glancing at the prisoners, and once in the camp, the reality struck me again. This was not a prison in the way I'd imagined. There were rows of neat wooden barracks, mess halls serving warm meals, and even a recreation field where some of us could kick around a football. I remember the first meal I had in that camp, a plate piled with roast beef, mashed potatoes, and green peas, with a mug of hot coffee. I looked around at the other men, their faces a mix of suspicion and disbelief. Are we in a hotel or a prison? I joked quietly, though inside, I was trembling with uncertainty. Why would our captors treat us with such humanity? What was the catch? That night, as I lay on the thin mattress in my bunk, the quiet murmurs of the other prisoners filled the air. Some whispered fears of hidden cruelty waiting just around the corner. Others wondered if this was some strange form of psychological warfare. But I had no answers, only the flickering image of the American stars outside my window, and the uneasy feeling that this was only the beginning of a story none of us were prepared for. The days that followed blurred together in a strange rhythm, like a dream half remembered. The camp at Millfield was orderly, too orderly for men like us, hardened by battle and suspicion. Guards in crisp uniforms strolled casually, their rifles slung loosely over their shoulders, chatting amongst themselves instead of barking orders. It was as if the whole place was a well-run boarding school rather than a prison. One afternoon, I caught sight of a woman near the camp gates. She was delivering parcels from the Red Cross. A tall, elegant lady named Margaret, they said. She wore a simple but impeccably tailored navy blue dress that hugged her slender figure just enough to catch the eye without being improper. Her polished black shoes clicked on the gravel path, and a delicate pearl necklace glinted in the sunlight. Despite the uniformity of the camp, she brought with her a flash of something different, warmth, maybe, or hope. Margaret smiled at us, her eyes kind but guarded. She handed out packages filled with soap, toothpaste, writing paper, and even chocolate bars. I remember thinking, if I'd known the enemy's supply chain was this good, I might have switched sides for the sweets alone. Some of the men joked, whispering about how she must be a secret Hollywood star disguised as a charity worker. But there was no denying the strange comfort her visits brought. We were allowed to write letters home, though each word was carefully censored. I struggled to find the right balance. How much truth could I reveal without risking my family's safety or my own? The thought of my mother, clutching ration cards as winter crept over London, weighed heavily on me. I scribbled words about the food, the health of the men, and the odd kindness we'd been shown, all while knowing that such news would sound like fantasy back home. The camp's routine settled into something almost normal. Roll calls at dawn, meals 3 times a day, work details in the fields or repairing fences. Tasks designed to keep us busy but not broken. I was assigned to a team helping local farmers harvest the corn. The work was hard but honest, and for a brief while, I felt less like a prisoner and more like a man caught between two worlds. One evening, a few of us gathered around the small recreation area. A football match had just ended, and the laughter of men who'd once faced death together now echoed under the fading light. I caught a glimpse of one of the younger soldiers, Tom, wiping sweat from his brow as he grinned. "If this is prison, I want to know where I can sign up for the next match." But beneath the smiles, the old fears lingered. We traded theories about what this kindness meant. "They want us healthy for forced labor," one said. Another muttered, "Maybe it's a trick before something worse." I kept my thoughts to myself, unsure what to believe. Yet nothing prepared me for what came next. One evening, the camp guards called us to a large hall near the mess tent. We shuffled inside, the murmur of voices buzzing with curiosity and suspicion. The room was dimly lit, a white sheet hung on one wall, and in the corner, a bulky machine hummed quietly. The guards explained, in a tone that was more invitation than command, that we would be watching a moving picture. I didn't know what to expect. Some droning propaganda film, perhaps, or a lecture on the futility of our cause. Instead, the lights dimmed, and suddenly, the room was filled with flickering images of cowboys galloping across dusty plains, slapstick comedians tumbling through absurd mishaps, and dazzling women in shimmering gowns singing and dancing. Laughter erupted, hesitant at first, then growing as scenes unfolded with a vibrant life none of us had seen in years. I sat there, spellbound and confused. Here we were, prisoners of war, allowed to watch Hollywood movies, the very culture we had been taught to despise. Felt like a surreal joke, one with no punchline yet. As the credits rolled and the lights came back on, I caught myself smiling. A genuine, unguarded smile. Somewhere deep inside, I wondered, could this be the beginning of something that would change us all? Or was it just another trick, a fleeting illusion before the harsh reality returned? The next morning, the memory of that night's movie lingered like a strange aftertaste, sweet, unfamiliar, and a little unsettling. I caught myself humming a tune from the musical we'd seen, a light, bouncy melody that felt entirely out of place in a camp surrounded by barbed wire. My bunkmate, Arthur, caught me and gave a dry laugh. "Careful, James," he said. "Next thing you know, you'll be asking for tap shoes instead of boots." The camp had changed somehow. The mood among the men shifted from wary suspicion to a quiet curiosity. During breakfast, conversations buzzed with talk of the films. Western heroes riding across endless deserts. Comedians whose clumsy antics made even the grimmest faces crack a smile. And glamorous actresses with dazzling smiles and sparkling gowns that seemed to defy the drabness around us. I found myself drawn to the idea of these stories. Fantasies of freedom, laughter, and life beyond war. Yet part of me struggled to reconcile this with everything I'd been taught. How can America be so full of joy and color when we're at war with them? I asked Arthur one afternoon as we worked fixing fence posts under the hot sun. He shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. Maybe they're not so different from us after all. Or maybe they just want us to think that. The work details became a strange blend of camaraderie and quiet rebellion. Some of us began mimicking lines from the comedies, exchanging jokes in broken English, trying to imitate the exaggerated gestures of the actors. I caught myself grinning more often, a dangerous habit for a prisoner of war. One afternoon, while helping in the camp's small library, I met a woman named Elizabeth. She was one of the librarians, a sharp-eyed American with chestnut hair pulled back into a neat bun, wearing a light blue blouse tucked into a modest skirt that hinted at her slender figure. Her glasses perched delicately on her nose, and a simple silver bracelet glinted on her wrist. Elizabeth had a quiet kindness about her, but there was something else, an unspoken sadness in her eyes. She handed me a copy of Mark Twain's The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and as I flipped through the pages, I felt a strange connection to a world so different from the one I'd left behind. We exchanged a few words, careful not to overstep the invisible boundaries between prisoner and guard. She mentioned how the camp organized cultural programs to keep spirits up, including the movie nights that had become the highlight of many men's weeks. I joked, if only they showed more of those musicals. Maybe we'd all start dancing instead of digging trenches. Elizabeth smiled, a flicker of amusement softening her gaze. Maybe one day you'll see more than just movies here. Her words stayed with me, though I wasn't sure what she meant. Was there something more behind the camp's strange hospitality? Or was it simply kindness in a world gone mad? As the days wore on, the films became a ritual. We'd gather in the makeshift theater, the flickering light casting shadows on faces worn by war but softened by laughter. Some nights, the guards joined in, their stern expressions melting into smiles as slapstick comedians stumbled and fell. I noticed changes in the men around me. The hardened officers who once barked orders now whispered about the films, debating the characters and plots. Young recruits, barely out of school, talked of learning English phrases from the screen, their eyes alight with a spark I hadn't seen since before the war. Yet, beneath the surface, questions churned. Why were we allowed such freedoms? What was the purpose behind this unusual treatment? Was it a sign of weakness or a clever tactic? One evening, after a particularly lively screening of a comedy, I overheard two guards talking in hushed tones. They're changing, one said. Not just their manners, but their minds. The other nodded slowly. Cinema is a powerful weapon, James. Maybe stronger than any rifle. I didn't know then if that was a threat or a promise. But as I lay in my bunk that night, the flickering images from the screen dancing behind my eyelids, I realized that the war we were fighting wasn't just on battlefields. It was inside us all. And the next reel was waiting to play. Weeks slipped by, each day folding into the next like pages of a well-worn book. Yet the camp at Millfield never ceased to surprise me. The routine, strict roll calls, hearty meals, and work details in the fields, had settled into a rhythm, but it was the evenings that held the real magic. The flickering glow of the projector became our lifeline, a beacon piercing through the dull monotony of captivity. One crisp autumn evening, as golden leaves danced lazily outside the barracks, we gathered once more in the makeshift theater. The air was thick with anticipation and the faint scent of wood smoke from nearby chimneys. The guards, usually so distant, moved among us with a casual ease, sharing quiet smiles and even a few light-hearted jabs at the films themselves. It was almost as if, for those 2 hours, the fences and barbed wire dissolved. The film that night was a romantic musical, a dazzling spectacle of swirling gowns, tap-dancing ensembles, and gleaming chandeliers. The leading lady, a vision in a crimson silk dress that hugged her curves and shimmered under the stage lights, dazzled us with her confident smile and playful glances. Her shoes, silk slippers embroidered with tiny sequins, tapped out rhythms that echoed in the silent hall, stirring something unexpected within the crowd. I found myself captivated not just by the story but by the characters' freedom, their laughter, their boldness, their refusal to be confined by the rigid expectations I'd known at home. The women on screen spoke with a confidence and wit that challenged every lesson of restraint I'd been taught. I glanced around and saw others equally mesmerized, some biting their lips to hide smiles, others exchanging furtive glances as if acknowledging a secret understanding. After the screening, a group of us lingered outside under the stars, voices low and thoughtful. Tom, usually quick with a joke, was unusually quiet. "Do you think it's possible," he asked, "that there's more to life than duty and orders? More than what we've been told?" Arthur shook his head, his face shadowed in the moonlight. "I don't know, but those films, they make it hard to believe the world is as black and white as we thought." The camp itself seemed to breathe with a new energy. The fields we worked in, once just a backdrop to our captivity, now felt like a small piece of a world that continued beyond the fences. Sometimes, as I hauled bundles of hay or repaired a fence, I caught glimpses of local farmers waving or children playing nearby. Their casual kindness was disarming, a stark contrast to the hatred and suspicion I'd expected. One afternoon, Elizabeth, the librarian, approached me with a quiet invitation. "There's a small concert tonight in the rec hall," she said, her eyes bright despite the weariness around us. "Some volunteers from the Red Cross are bringing instruments. Would you like to come?" I hesitated, then nodded. That evening, the camp's rec hall was transformed. Candles flickered on wooden tables, casting soft light over faces eager for something beyond the day-to-day. A makeshift orchestra played gentle melodies. Mozart, folk tunes, even a lively jig that had us tapping our feet. Elizabeth sat nearby, her simple green dress flowing over her knees, a delicate silver ring glinting on her finger. As the music swirled around us, I felt a strange warmth, a fragile hope threading through the gathering. For a moment, the war felt distant, a shadow at the edges of a world filled with song and laughter. But even in that fragile peace, the questions remained. Why were we treated with such unexpected humanity? What was the purpose behind this strange kindness? And beneath it all, a whisper of unease. What would come next, once the lights dimmed and the music faded? As the final notes lingered in the air, I caught sight of a figure standing at the edge of the hall. A tall man in a sharp uniform, his face unreadable in the half-light. His eyes met mine briefly, and in that moment, I sensed that the story we were living was far from over. The war within these fences was only just beginning. The days grew colder as November crept into the camp, frosting the edges of the barracks and turning the fields a pale, brittle brown. Yet beneath the chill, a strange warmth pulsed among us prisoners. A fragile sense of community forged by shared laughter, whispered conversations, and the nightly escape offered by the flickering screen. One morning, as I was making my way back from the mess hall, I noticed a commotion near the camp's main gate. A sleek black car rolled up, its polished surface gleaming even under the overcast sky. Out stepped a man with an aura of quiet authority, Colonel Richard Hawthorne, the camp's new commandant. Tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored uniform that hugged his broad shoulders, he carried himself with a sharp gaze that seemed to miss nothing. His steel-gray eyes scanned the crowd as if sizing us all up, and his presence immediately commanded attention. Word spread quickly that Colonel Hawthorne was not like the others. Rumors swirled. Some said he was a strict disciplinarian. Others whispered that he had a reputation for fairness, even kindness. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. What changes would he bring? That evening, as the camp gathered for the usual movie screening, Colonel Hawthorne appeared in the hall, standing quietly to one side. His stern face softened only slightly as the projector lit up the room. The film was a sharp, witty comedy. Quick dialogue, clever gags, and a heroine who outsmarted every obstacle with a mischievous grin. The contrast between the levity on screen and the tension in the room was striking. After the credits rolled, the colonel stepped forward. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and clear, "I understand that many of you find comfort in these films. They are not just entertainment. They are a reminder of the world beyond these fences. But remember, you are still prisoners, and discipline remains paramount." There was a murmur of assent, but also a flicker of unease. His words were a reminder that beneath the kindness, the rules still held firm. Later that night, I found myself wandering near the fence, staring out at the dark silhouette of the Ohio woods. The quiet was broken by a soft voice behind me. "You're James, right?" I turned to see Elizabeth, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her scarf wrapped loosely around her neck. "Yes," I replied, surprised. She hesitated before continuing. "There's something you should know. The colonel, he's different because he understands what this camp truly is, and what it could become." I frowned, curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Elizabeth looked around, then stepped closer. "There are whispers among the staff, plans to change the way things are run here, to prepare for something bigger, something none of us fully understand yet." Her words sent a chill deeper than the autumn air. "Prepare for what?" She shook her head. I don't know. But I think the films, the kindness, they're part of it. A way to keep us calm, to shape us. Not just prisoners, but something more. I swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling in. Could the very things that had brought us comfort also be a subtle form of control? Was the world inside the camp shifting beneath our feet? As I walked back to my barracks, the distant howl of a train whistle echoed through the night. A reminder that beyond these fences, the war raged on, and our fate remained uncertain. The warm glow of the projector was no longer just an escape. It was a signal, a beginning, and perhaps a warning. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that the Real story was far from over. Winter crept in with a biting chill that seeped through the thin walls of the barracks, frosting the window panes and turning each breath into a cloud of mist. Yet inside Millfield Camp, life pulsed with a strange vitality, fueled by the nightly film screenings and the subtle changes stirring beneath the surface. One gray afternoon, as snowflakes began to drift lazily from a leaden sky, I found myself invited to a small gathering in the rec hall. The room was warmer than usual, lit by flickering lanterns that cast dancing shadows over faces both familiar and new. Elizabeth was there, her chestnut hair escaping in soft tendrils from beneath a woolen cap, her green eyes sparkling with a mix of excitement and apprehension. The group was a mix of prisoners and camp staff, men and women quietly exchanging news, ideas, and, most surprisingly, books. It was an informal book club, Elizabeth explained, a chance to share stories beyond the screen. The first book up for discussion was Orwell's Animal Farm, a tale of rebellion and power that seemed fitting for our strange world behind barbed wire. As we debated the themes, freedom, control, the corrupting influence of authority, I felt the walls of my own beliefs beginning to crack. The parallels between the story and our lives were impossible to ignore. Some prisoners nodded in understanding, others looked uneasy, but none could deny the uncomfortable truth lurking beneath the surface. Afterwards, Elizabeth pulled me aside. James, you have to understand, the camp isn't just a prison. It's a crossroads. What you see here, the kindness, the films, the books, it's part of a larger experiment. To change minds, yes, but also to prepare. Prepare for what? I asked, the question heavy on my tongue. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. There are talks of a future where enemies become allies, where the old world falls away, and something new takes its place. This camp is a testing ground for ideas, for people, for what the world might become after the war. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. Could such hope exist amid the ruins of conflict? And yet, as I looked around at the faces illuminated by lantern light, I sensed that many of us, whether we admitted it or not, craved exactly that. The days that followed brought a subtle shift. The guards smiled more, conversations grew less guarded, and the films took on new meaning. The comedies were no longer mere distractions, they were lessons in resilience. The romances spoke of possibilities beyond rigid roles. The westerns, with their vast open skies and tales of justice, became symbols of a freedom we had only dared to dream about. One evening, during a break in the screenings, I caught Colonel Hawthorne speaking quietly with Elizabeth near the rec hall. His expression was serious, eyes scanning the crowd as if weighing the future itself. I approached cautiously. Colonel, is it true? Are we part of something bigger than just a prison camp? He regarded me for a moment, then nodded slowly. Mr. Thornton, this war is not just fought on battlefields. It's fought in hearts and minds. Here we have an opportunity to heal wounds, to build bridges, but it requires trust and courage, both in those who hold the keys and those who wear the uniforms. His words lingered long after the conversation ended. Trust and courage, qualities I hadn't associated with Captivity. And yet, amid the snow-covered fields and flickering lights, I began to believe that even here, behind barbed wire, something fragile and powerful was taking root. But as hope blossomed, a shadow loomed. Rumors of new arrivals, stricter regulations, and whispered warnings crept through the camp like an approaching storm. The delicate balance we'd found felt precarious, as if the next chapter held both promise and peril. And somewhere, beneath the quiet snow, the question remained. who truly held the future in their hands. Spring arrived slowly at Millfield, melting the last of the snow and painting the fields in soft greens and bursts of wildflowers. The air carried the scent of renewal and, for the first time since capture, I felt a flicker of something close to hope. The camp was alive with quiet energy. The daily routines remained, but beneath the surface, subtle changes had taken hold. The guards' attitudes softened, the prisoners' spirits lifted, and the nights at the theater became more than just entertainment. They were a shared experience that blurred the lines between enemy and human. One afternoon, I was summoned to a meeting in the commandant's office. The room was modest but tidy, sunlight streaming through large windows onto polished wooden floors. Colonel Hawthorne sat behind a desk, his expression serious but not unkind. "James," he began, "we've been observing the impact of the programs here. The films, the cultural exchanges, they're more effective than we anticipated. But there's more to come." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were plans for a new initiative, a program to train select prisoners in skills that could aid post-war reconstruction. Carpentry, mechanics, even teaching English. The goal was clear: to prepare men not just for survival, but for rebuilding their shattered homelands. I felt a mixture of pride and disbelief. "You want us to help rebuild Germany?" He nodded. "And Britain and France and every nation touched by this conflict. The war will end. When it does, the world will need men who understand both sides." The idea was revolutionary and terrifying. To think that the enemy would invest in us, trust us with such a responsibility. Yet, beneath the uncertainty, I sensed a profound truth. The war was changing us all. That evening, at the theater, the film was a stirring drama about forgiveness and reconciliation. The heroine, dressed in a flowing white gown that caught the light like a halo, spoke lines that echoed in the hushed room. "Only by letting go of hatred can we find peace." As the credits rolled, I caught sight of Elizabeth in the back row. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, her fingers clutching a worn copy of Animal Farm. Later, she confided in me, "These stories, they're teaching us how to imagine a future beyond conflict. But it won't be easy." Her words rang true. Outside the camp, the world was still engulfed in chaos. But here, behind barbed wire, seeds of something new were taking root. Yet, even as hope blossomed, a new tension simmered beneath the surface. A group of prisoners arrived from a camp in the south, their faces hardened, eyes wary. They spoke of rumors, whispers of stricter controls, of men punished for questioning orders, of a growing divide within the camp. One evening, I overheard a heated conversation between some of the newcomers and a senior officer. "This isn't the place we were told about," one man spat. "It's a trap. They're softening us up, then they'll break us." The words sent a chill through me. Could the fragile peace we'd found shatter so easily? Was the kindness a mask for something darker? That night, as I lay in my bunk, the flickering glow of the projector casting long shadows, I realized the war we fought here was far from over. It was a battle for our very souls, a fight between hope and fear, trust and suspicion. And somewhere, beyond the camp's fences, the world waited, holding its breath for what would come next. The days stretched longer as summer settled over Millfield, the sun casting golden light across the fields and warming the worn wooden barracks. Life inside the camp had taken on a rhythm of its own, a strange blend of routine, camaraderie, and cautious optimism. Yet beneath the surface, tensions simmered like a distant storm waiting to break. One humid afternoon, as I was repairing a fence post near the edge of the camp, I noticed a new arrival. A slender man with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His name was Daniel Collins, and rumors quickly spread that he was a former intelligence officer, brought here to oversee security and root out dissent. Daniel's presence unsettled many of us. He moved with a quiet intensity, questioning prisoners and guards alike, his gaze lingering too long on those who dared speak freely. His uniform was immaculate, the brass buttons gleaming, and a silver watch chain glinted at his waistcoat, a symbol of authority that demanded respect. That evening, during the usual film screening, Daniel stood silently at the back, arms crossed. The movie was a tense thriller about espionage and betrayal, its shadowy scenes flickering across the faces of the men gathered. I caught his eyes for a moment. They were cold, calculating. I wondered what he made of the roomful of prisoners, some laughing quietly, others lost in thought. After the film, whispers spread about Daniel's new directives. Stricter curfews, increased searches, and warnings that any talk of rebellion or escape would be met with swift consequences. The fragile trust we'd built felt fragile indeed, hanging by a thread. One night, as I returned to the barracks, I stumbled upon a secret meeting in the dimly lit rec hall. A small group of prisoners gathered, their voices low and urgent. They spoke of resistance, of holding on to dignity and hope despite the tightening grip of authority. Tom, ever the optimist, stood at the center. We can't let fear win. We have to find ways to keep our spirits alive, even if they try to break us. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. The films, the books, the music, they were more than distractions. They were lifelines, threads connecting us to a world beyond these fences. But Daniel was a shadow looming over us all. His presence was a reminder that the camp was still a prison, and that freedom, whether of body or mind, was never guaranteed. In the days that followed, I found myself watching him more closely. There was a moment when our eyes met across the courtyard, and for a brief second, I caught a flicker of something unexpected. A hesitation, perhaps, or a flicker of doubt. Could a man like Daniel be more than the enforcer he seemed? Was there a story behind those cold eyes? As the sun set over Millfield, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I realized that the battle within the camp was evolving. It was no longer just about survival, but about the choices we made between fear and courage, silence and voice. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that the next chapter would test us all in ways we could never have imagined. The heat of July pressed down on Millfield Camp, turning the dusty paths into powdery trails and making the nights sticky with humidity. Despite the discomfort, the camp buzzed with an undercurrent of anticipation. Word had spread that a special event was planned, a visit from a group of American filmmakers, there to document life inside the camp. The news stirred mixed emotions among us prisoners. Curiosity, suspicion, and for some, a flicker of hope. On the morning of their arrival, the camp was abuzz. Guards polished their rifles and straightened uniforms, while prisoners tidied their bunks and rehearsed polite smiles. I caught a glimpse of Elizabeth, her auburn hair pulled into a loose bun, wearing a crisp white blouse and a knee-length skirt that swayed with her purposeful stride. There was a nervous energy about her as she prepared to meet the visitors. The filmmakers arrived in a convoy of cars, their equipment gleaming in the sunlight. They moved through the camp with practiced ease, cameras clicking and microphones poised to capture every detail. I watched from a distance as they interviewed guards and prisoners alike, their questions probing but respectful. Later that day, I was called to participate in a group discussion with one of the directors, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Lane. She spoke with a warm but determined voice, asking about our experiences, our hopes, and fears. I found myself speaking honestly, perhaps more than I intended. Life here is complicated, I said. There's kindness, yes, but also uncertainty. We live between hope and fear. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. That tension is what makes your story important. It's not just about captivity. It's about resilience. That evening, the filmmakers set up a private screening of some of their recent work. The room was transformed into a small cinema, the flickering images casting familiar shadows. As the film played, a documentary capturing moments of daily life, laughter, and struggle, I realized how far we'd come from the frightened soldiers who first arrived months ago. But amidst the warmth, a shadow lingered. Daniel Collins was present, watching quietly from the back. After the screening, he approached me. "Your honesty will serve you well, James," he said, his tone unreadable. "But remember, the world outside this camp is watching. How you present yourselves matters." His words carried a weight I couldn't ignore. The camp was no longer just a place of confinement, it was a stage, and we were both actors and audience. That night, As the projector's glow faded and silence settled over the barracks, I wondered what role we were truly playing. Were we prisoners or pioneers of a fragile peace? And what secrets lay hidden behind the lenses and bright lights? The war was far from over, but here, within these fences, a new story was unfolding. One of humanity, conflict, and the uncertain path toward redemption. And as I drifted to sleep, the question lingered. When the cameras stop rolling, what truths will remain in the shadows? The days grew shorter as autumn returned to Millfield, painting the fields with shades of amber and crimson. The camp felt quieter now, as if holding its breath before a storm no one dared to name. The presence of the filmmakers had left an imprint, a delicate thread weaving hope and uncertainty through the prisoners' lives. One evening, after the usual film screening, I found myself alone near the fence, gazing out toward the darkening woods beyond. The barbed wire glinted faintly in the moonlight, a harsh reminder of the walls that still confined us. Yet, in the distance, I glimpsed a flicker of light, like a distant star refusing to be extinguished. Suddenly, a shadow moved beside me. It was Elizabeth, her face illuminated softly by the glow of a lantern she carried. She wore a deep green coat that hugged her slender frame, the collar turned up against the chill. Her eyes held a mixture of resolve and vulnerability. "James," she whispered, "there's something you need to see, something they don't want us to know." Curiosity and caution warred within me, but I followed her through winding paths behind the camp, past empty storage sheds and silent watchtowers. We stopped before a small, unmarked building, its windows dark, its door locked tight. Elizabeth pulled a small key from her pocket, her hands trembling slightly as she fit it into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with crates and equipment. In the center stood an old projector, its reels labeled with dates and titles none of us had seen before. "What is this?" I asked, stepping inside. She looked at me gravely.
Archives.
"Films that show a side of the war and this camp that's been kept hidden."
Propaganda, surveillance, secret.
As we sifted through the reels, a chilling realization dawned. Some films portrayed staged scenes of prisoner mistreatment, designed to fuel hatred and justify reprisals. Others showed covert meetings between officers and officials, hinting at plans far beyond what we'd imagined. "It's a web of lies," Elizabeth said softly, "but also a story waiting to be told." The weight of the discovery pressed down on me. Everything, the kindness, the films, the hope, was entwined with shadows of control and manipulation. Yet within that darkness, a spark of truth endured. We knew then that our time at Millfield was drawing to a close. Repatriation talks had begun, and soon we would cross the ocean again, returning to a homeland scarred by war and uncertainty. But the stories we carried, the laughter, the music, the films would not fade. They were a testament to resilience, to the power of humanity even in captivity. As Elizabeth and I locked the door behind us, the distant echo of a projector's reel spun on in my mind, a reminder that sometimes, the greatest battles are fought not with weapons, but with stories. And somewhere beyond the horizon, a new chapter awaited, one where the truth, finally unspooled, might change everything. The flickering light was not just an escape. It was a beginning,